Vosloo, and I'm from Sandenbergh Vosloo Attorneys. And today's webinar, I just want to thank Tian for the opportunity. It's interesting times for us. It's exciting times, and I'm going to be talking about the 3 C's of telehealth: cover, consent, and children. I don't know who so kindly put a smiley face on my slides, but it will remind me to smile, hopefully. I've been involved, like Tian said, with medical legal compliance work for almost 4 years now. And basically what we do is we try and keep practitioners like yourself out of trouble. We've been listening to your concerns and just your uncertainties with regards to telehealth. And the biggest thing that we've picked up that people are just complaining about or concerned about or just saying in general is that there's a complete information overload at the moment. And I just want to say we all brought this onto ourselves, because at the beginning of the year, social media was all about 2020 year of plenty. So welcome to the year of plenty, where we give you plenty of information. So hopefully this webinar will also just give you some information, but I really hope that it will be a practical guideline to assist you to do telehealth better. So let's jump right into it. So as you know, during the lockdown period, we all still need to do business, and telehealth now makes this possible. It's also a safer alternative to face-to-face consultations, and it's now legal. And there are major benefits of telehealth, not only for you as the practitioner, but also for your patients. And I really believe that this is the future of healthcare. So how do you keep yourself out of trouble? Right, so let's start with the first C, which is cover. So the guidelines are quite clear that the consulting practitioner remains responsible for the treatment decisions and recommendations that they give to a patient. So the buck always stops with you. It has always, and telehealth doesn't make this any different. So you need to be careful with what treatment you give, what decisions you make, and what recommendations you give to your patients. One of the main things that you need to start with is your medical malpractice insurance. You need to get in writing from your medical insurer or your association that your cover or your group cover has been amended to include telehealth services, and that the cover and the risks associated with it is covered. So most of you, I trust, have received this communication, but if you don't have it in writing, please ask your association or your insurer to send that to you in writing. And then I want to touch base on a couple of things that you can implement in your practice to mitigate some of your risk. So one of the main things, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is just good record keeping. Now more than ever, your admin and your records need to be up to date, and you need to take detailed notes. And then also ensure that the advice or the recommendations that you're giving to your patient is understood by them. That you're doing it in a simple language that they understand. And a practical thing would be to ask your patient to relay back what you said to them, just so that you can make sure that they're understanding exactly what you are explaining to them. And then I want to touch on privacy and confidentiality. So just as a, sort of a definition of the two, privacy is the right of an individual to have control over his or her personal information and how it is collected, used, and stored. And you comply with privacy through complying with the regulatory guidelines that your councils have provided you with, and to be POPI compliant. And then confidentiality is the duty of anyone entrusted with personal information to keep that personal information a secret and secure, obviously. So some practical things to consider when you're consulting with a patient is who can hear your conversation. I'm of the opinion that if your spouse can hear what your patient is telling you, then you are in breach of your patient's confidentiality. Also, who's in your room. Maybe during the lockdown this isn't applicable, but when we use telehealth outside of this, you need to inform your patient if there's someone else with you in the room. Tell your patient, get them, introduce them, get their consent that that person is there for whatever reason, whether it be training or whatever. Just get your patient's consent that that person sits in the consultation. And how can you make a consultation a little bit more confidential? So one of the things is that you can use earphones, so that for example, your spouse cannot hear what your patient is saying, and you can use it. Close the door of your office or bedroom or wherever you're consulting. Or if you've got a busy toddler with me, lock them outside with dad and snacks, like I had to do today. So those are some practical things just around privacy and confidentiality, which brings us to the next point, which is data protection. Data protection is so important. The immediate things that you can implement, and that is fairly easy for most people that don't necessarily have IT degrees or not tech savvy, is to check your passwords for your PC and your email. Are they good, strong passwords? Do you update, change them regularly? Is your antivirus system up to date? Do you have a secure Wi-Fi connection, or can your neighbors connect to your Wi-Fi connection? Do you use secure video conferencing software when you're consulting with your client, with your patients? So these are all things that you can practically implement fairly easily. And then other things that are just really important, and you will have to get a professional IT person to assist you with this, is more on a technical side with regards to how you're sending documents, where are you storing them, etc. And when we sit with clients to do POPI compliance checklists, some of the questions that we ask them is, and you can ask yourself this as well, because by asking yourself these questions, you'll immediately start to realize the risk that you have. So is your data stored on your computer and the cloud? And do you have sufficient backup systems? Do you know the difference between cloud storage and cloud backup? Is the personal data you send via email or uploading to the cloud storage protected with end-to-end encryption? Is the place where you store your data safe and secure, whether it be in a filing cabinet or online in the cloud or on a external hard drive? And who has access to your computer? Do your children play games on it? And could they accidentally install malware on your computer? So these are all considerations to consider, and definitely get an IT person to assist you with this. Why is data protection so important these days? So the POPI Act specifies that the penalties of jail time of up to 10 years and a fine of up to 10 million rand for contravening the sections relating to data protection. And the reality is hackers can hold your system ransom. And it would be really bad for your reputation. You could suffer financial damage. There would be a work interruption. And most likely lawsuits would ensue. So don't make your practice an easy target. Make it as difficult as possible for anyone to hack your information, the data that you gather about clients and patients. So really, really important that you cover yourself in this aspect as well. And then in terms of the treatment that you're giving, how do you cover yourself in this regard? So each practitioner would need to sit down and discover what exactly you can treat without physically being present, and which treatments you need to refer away. Because the reality is we can't do everything that we used to be able to do, and you need to draw the line very clearly with regards to what you need to do in person, and if you can't do it in person, then what you need to refer away. And the basic principle still applies. Treat what is within your scope of practice and treat what is in your scope of experience. This is not the time to experiment with treatments, and do not try and explain to patients how to DIY treat themselves. If such treatment should be done by a professional, they shouldn't be trying it themselves. For example, dry needling. And then, one of the things that have been coming up in the conversations that I've been having with my clients is just emergency telemedicine, because it's one of the points that are in the guidelines. So in an emergency situation, there's no time to get proper medical history, go through a questionnaire with your patient, and there's no time to get an informed consent. So the question you need to ask yourself as a practitioner is, can you treat this emergency, or can you stabilize this patient? And if you can, what are your options? If you can't, what do you say to that patient? So the guidelines are fairly clear that whatever you've told your patient or recommended or advised them, you need to give those instructions in writing as well. So now I've been asked, what would qualify as writing? So for practical reasons, if you send your patient an email in an emergency type of situation, they will probably never, only afterwards they will see it. So, that would necessarily not be a good idea. So, I would suggest something like a WhatsApp message or a voice note would qualify in an emergency situation as being in writing. And remember, you've got a higher duty of care than, for example, I have. So practice some scenarios that, could possibly come up in your scope of practice. So, for example, a dietitian, and their best friend phones them because they've got a peanut allergy. How can you treat that? Can you stabilize that? No, you need to give advice to them to go to, the closest facility that can treat it, and then afterwards, obviously, give that in writing. Or if you're a doctor and your cousin WhatsApp phone calls you because their child has a very high fever, again, what recommendations can you make? What advice can you give? And give that in writing. So that basically covers, just an emergency telemedicine type of scenario. So moving over to our second C, which is consent. So have you ever wondered why it's called informed consent? So you need to inform your patient what exactly they are consenting to. So you need to physically go through the consent with your patient before they sign. You just email it and get them to sign, and then you just continue with your consultation. I'm not of the opinion that that is sufficient. So practically consider, how would you, go through this consent in this time, a phone call or an explanatory email, or even both, and make notes in your files of any additional steps that you've taken to explain this consent to your patient. And then also, during your consultation, go through the important aspects again of your consent. For example, if you're recording it, the consultation, the costs, any treatment risks involved, etc. So telehealth is currently developing at lightning speed, and we're seeing changes every week, but we need to develop with the guidelines, and so does your informed consent. So I've seen many associations have given their members a suggested template, but usually it comes with a little disclaimer just to say, you need to make it your own, we're not responsible, etc., etc. So, a copy and paste template may not be sufficient to cover you. And it will always be your responsibility. It's not going to be the association's responsibility to make sure that you've got a proper informed consent and that it complies with the laws and guidelines. And then video recordings. I think there was a little bit of a confusion that came in. So I'm going to try and explain, in my opinion, what happened. So the Allied Health Professions Council of South Africa, they brought out a guideline to state that meetings should be recorded. So I've just did a screenshot of the excerpt of their guideline, and you can see there at 8.1, the software must have the ability to record all consultations in order to ensure that all consultations are recorded and added to patient records. So immediately in all the informed consents, recording, became an issue. The question I was asked is, why do we need to record our telehealth consultations where we never needed to record, our face-to-face consultations? And I don't have the answer, but I can tell you that our firm, we're communicating with the Chiropractic Association of South Africa, and they've sent through a letter to the registrar of the Allied Health Council's Practitioners Council, and just to get clarity on this point, because I think with a lot of practitioners, recordings don't sit well with them. So we're just getting clarity from them, and as soon as we do have clarity, I'll share that information with Tian, and that he can share it with you guys on the Facebook group. And then if for some reason, we are told that we need to make recordings, or, the guidelines are set in such a way that it seems like we do have to, or the medical aids require it, then in your informed consent, you need to include that the meeting will be recorded, and then also set out your reasons for such a recording. It could be for education purposes or for record keeping purposes. And then while you are recording, as you begin your session and the recording button is on, just again tell to your patients that the consultation is being recorded, and then again get their verbal consent. And then just with regards to wording in your informed consent, so we need to obviously have our informed consent right for what the guidelines state currently. So if you need a good copy and paste section, I like what the Speech, Language and Hearing Association have set out in their template around video recordings. I've left a link there, so you can, if you need to copy and paste something, I would suggest that is a good clause with regards to video recordings. And also, you need to explain to your client, in your patient, in your informed consent, where you're going to store such video recordings, because obviously it may contain sensitive information, sensitive pictures. So they need to be reassured that nobody has access except the practitioner. So I think for the HPC SA guys, there's no specific guidelines on this. So if you can record your session well enough without a video recording, then I suggest you do so, unless your counsel advises differently or the medical age required. So your normal practice of taking notes is sufficient. And then on a practical note, if you are taking notes during your meeting, remember your patient cannot see what you're doing. So just explain to them, give me a moment, I'm just writing that down. It's probably out of sight. And then in terms of the informed consent, a little bit about what to put inside of it. So we've gone through the guidelines of both that you give, as well as the risks to the patient regarding confidentiality and the risks of telehealth in general. So then you also have to give a brief summary of what telehealth is and the benefits thereof. And you must make clear to your patient that your consultation will be over a video conferencing software platform and no longer face-to-face. And then it must contain your full names and your practice name. It must state what specific telehealth treatment your patient is consenting to. It must set out the security measures that you've taken to ensure privacy and confidentiality of your patient during your consultation and after your consultation with the data that you've gathered. And it must state that you will be gathering medical information and medical history of your patient. So, prep them beforehand, just to, so they can have that information on hand when you're consulting with them. Then your consent ought to be POPI compliant. Excuse me. And there must be a finance or payment section on the costs of the consultation, and the possibility that the medical aid will not cover the consultation or will only cover part thereof. So just as a side note, debt collecting during this time will be an absolute nightmare. So try and mitigate your risk with an upfront payment. And if you are doing upfront payments, what will be your refund policy? For example, your patient has come on, you within 5 minutes realize that it's not within your scope of practice, you cannot treat this person over a telehealth platform, you need to refer them away. What's your refund policy? What are you going to do with regards to costs for that 5 minutes? So you need to put that into your informed consent so that your patient is aware of your refund policy. All right, and then as a, just a general note, in my opinion, a telehealth specific informed consent should rather be an addendum or a supplement to your usual informed consent, and certainly not a one-pager replacement. I really think practitioners are opening themselves up by not explaining to their patients what the risks of treatment is for their profession. All right, and then lots of questions also about signing of the informed consent. So PDF Reader, for example, has a fill and sign option. So you can explore other options out there, but make it easy for your patient to be able to sign the informed consent. And I've put the picture there so that you can never say, yo, that was such a boring webinar, there was no pictures in the presentation. So, I've included one picture at least. And then I would be cautious of getting a patient to state on an email that they consent without them actually signing on the dotted line of your informed consent. But the reality is a lot of people won't have access to a printer and a scanner. And I would use it rather as a last resort, but then also make sure that you print out that email where your patient has consented, and also save that email electronically. So the ethical guidelines do suggest that you can get informed consent either verbally or in writing, but the telehealth guidelines specifically talk about getting a signature. So I think it's a little bit open for debate, but I would err on the side of caution and rather getting a physical signature, whether it's a digital signature or a little scribble that they do on a fill and sign PDF, rather than just getting, yes, I do consent, just to cover yourself, especially if you're not recording the sessions. And then the guidelines also state that there should be a signature of a witness, but considering our current circumstances, this won't be practical for all patients. All right, then I'm moving over to our third C, which is children. Treating children, you guys know this, but if a child is under the age of 18, then the person is a child. You have to get the parents' consent. And remember, if they turn 18 during the lockdown period, and you're still consulting with them, you've got a follow-up session or whatever, then you just need to get consent again from them, because now they are no longer a minor but a major. And then my suggestion is that if the child is over the age of 12, like your guidelines state, and they can understand, they have the requisite mental capacity, then let them also sign the informed consent. And then when you start your session, explain what you are going to do, and then also get the child's verbal consent, and obviously record that well in your notes. And then as a general note, I would avoid recording sessions where children are involved. unless your counsel advises otherwise or the medical aids require same. It just doesn't sit well with me, so I would avoid it at this stage. And then you must always consider that the standard for children's privacy, confidentiality, and dignity are much higher than that of adults. And then some closing remarks. It's been an interesting 3 weeks. So the allied health guys considered telehealth practices before COVID-19 as unprofessional conduct, and the HPC only allowed it in limited circumstances where there was an existing patient relationship, so not applicable to new patients. And it's literally taken a pandemic to change the regulatory bodies' rules around telehealth. So now more than ever, you need to adapt and lay the foundation for this to become a permanent option of healthcare and not the exception. You may make mistakes, but limit your risks by being compliant with what's in your control. I've prepared a little bit of a to-do list in summary, so I'll just quickly go through it. So check your insurance, make sure that you are covered, get a good setup for your consultations for privacy and confidentiality, do what you can to protect data, practice, educate yourself, and if you're completely new to online anything, get a mentor. Then I've prepared a reading list, which is in the next slide. It'll take you between a half an hour and an hour. Take the time. If you haven't read these documents already, just to read them and make sure you understand what the guidelines are. And then get a compliant, informed consent, customized for your profession and for the specific risks associated with your specific scope of practice. And get legal assistance if you can. So here is my recommended reading list for the HPCSA guys. It's basically booklet 4, 9, and 10. I've presented you with the links there. I'm sure Tian will share these slides so that you can get the links far easier. And then for the allied health guys, there's also 2 sections there. One is the telemedicine guidelines. And then just in your normal code of ethics, there's a couple of pages that are relevant to what I've discussed today that you can go and read. And there's my business card. If we run out of time or whatever for questions, you can just pop in with me, and I'll gladly answer some of the questions that you have. And that's literally it for me. Tian, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tanya. So Tanya, we have a question here from Tamron. She says that she's been using Zoom for her psychotherapy sessions. HPCSA and my PPI have said it's acceptable, but I have seen so much bad press about it lately. What do you suggest?
So since in the last 2 weeks, the first informed consent that I drafted, we specifically excluded Zoom as a platform to use. And since then, Zoom has taken significant steps to make sure that their platform is safer. So I use a Mac computer, and I've already received 3 updates for Zoom. So in my opinion, it's starting to definitely change to a much safer platform. But the reality is that a platform where thousands of people are using it is a bigger target for hackers than, for example, a platform that 10 people use it. So I everyone should make that decision.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's quite important also to remember that somebody's drawing pictures for us again. But yeah, so it is important that we remember that you have to check with your societies also, because some of the societies have announced that Zoom is not going to be covered by the malpractice insurance. So best thing is to contact your malpractice insurer also and make sure that they are happy with you using Zoom. And also to make sure that when you, if you are continuing with Zoom, also if a patient is not feeling comfortable because of the whole media debacle that's going on, then you'll have to look at something else also. And I think on the Telehealth SA page, there's a lot of platforms available for you guys to go and have a look at. I know that Medici is a nice app to have, Doxy.me is a nice app, but also always look at the paid version. It's quite important, I think, that there's a reason why you pay for that version. It's because it's HIPAA compliant, okay, and it's got the BAA certificate. So yeah, so I think that's, thank you, Tanya, for that. Do we have any other questions from you guys? You guys are also quiet. Tasneem, I'm sure you've got a question.
No, I actually don't have any questions. She covered it all pretty well. I think for me, coming not from a therapist side, but from the geeky side of it when it comes to Zoom, it's a bit controversial because at the end of the day, if you're in the tech circles, you will have heard the reason why there was such an issue with Zoom was that people can easily get the link to the meeting. But if you have a password attached to your meeting, then you are covered. But there's also the other conspiracy side to it, which it is, a lot of it is got to do with corporate takeovers. So Google has their own products and Microsoft has their own products. And a lot of that has come from the corporate side of attacking Zoom, because Zoom has kind of taken over this online virtual space, both in learning and in corporate. So I think we must kind of just cover our own bases the way that Tanya nicely laid out for us. And when we have that, then we shouldn't have to worry. And as you said, Tian, if your association says it's fine, then go for it. Don't stress too much about that kind of stuff, because then we're getting ourselves caught up in these kind of like tech stuff that actually has nothing to do with us. As long as we cover all our bases and our associations say that platform is fine, then you're good to go.
Okay.
Sorry, may I say something? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, you can go, Tamron.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Tanya and Tasneem. I agree. I think just as a therapist, it's very overwhelming to be reading through News 24 and as you've said, all this sort of corporate stuff. I haven't had any clients particularly being worried about it. I was just concerned around, obviously, confidentiality. But I do find that Zoom is quite easy for people to be in contact. And I do worry about changing things again, because I think it's already such a big deal in their lives. And so I have been trying not to change. Tian, as you were saying, there are lots of different stuff to use. But thank you for saying that. I think I feel quite happy with Zoom because of that password. And I don't use my personal ID at all. It's always a new password and a new ID going into every session, even if I'm seeing them even twice a week. We do that. So thank you for your encouragement there. Thanks.
Can I just add to that? Another layer of security you can add is, if you would have noticed when you came into this webinar, I don't know if Tian set it up for everyone, but you can set the setting that you have to allow somebody in. So even if somebody somehow gets the meeting ID and the password, even then if you are the one who has to let somebody in and you know nobody else is supposed to be coming in the session, then there's no way that person can. It's not the problem wasn't that people were hacking into Zoom. It was the problem that if you have the meeting ID and it's an open meeting, anyone can join it. That was the issue. So if you have both the password and you have it set up that you have to allow people into your meeting, then you're fine. Then you're totally fine.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, just another point on the PPI, Tiana, are you suggesting that we need to almost on a weekly or even every twice a week check in with our PPIs? Because I have got written consent from Aon that I'm allowed to use Zoom. Do you suggest that we need to be doing that more regularly, checking in?
If you've got the written consent from Aon, then it's fine. they will have to then obviously send you an email if they no longer feel that Zoom is fine, the platform to use, as long as you've got it in written consent. I think that's quite important, and I think Tanya also touched base on that, is phone your malpractice insurance and make sure that they give it to you in writing. They need to send you something in writing that they will cover you for telehealth. Any other questions, guys?
Cool. I have a question, so I just want to confirm. We are not allowed to record or any session with children. So with adults, we have to, but with minors, not. Just want to confirm.
Sorry, Derek, can you ask that question again? The line was a bit unclear.
Okay, sure, I'll try again. I just want to confirm that Tanya mentioned that all recordings with or telehealth sessions with adults have to be recorded, but if it's a minor, then we should not record it.
Dorrit, so the allied health profession guys, their guidelines state that they need to use software that can make a recording. So it's my opinion that they have to record their sessions, but like I said earlier, we're getting clarity on it from the registrar. So as soon as we've got that clarity, we can inform the allied health guys just with regards to that aspect. But as it relates to the HPCSA practitioners, I'm not of the opinion that the guidelines state that it's a requirement. So unless they come up with something to say that it is a requirement, or if the medical aids say that it's a requirement for a claim to be processed, then we will probably need to adjust to it. But at this stage, for the HPCSA practitioners, it's not a requirement.
Okay. Then my second question is, how do you protect yourself in a case where you are providing patients with just general well-being tips for lockdown periods? So say, for example, the company that I work for, we are putting out live workouts for amputees, for example. How do I get patients to sort of, because I'm not actually watching their session live, so I can't give them feedback if they're not aligning their body properly, if they could potentially injure themselves. How do we as a company, or even just healthcare practitioners, protect ourselves from situations like that, where patients are doing home exercise programs and you're not there to ensure that they are safe or performing it correctly? What is your advice with regards to that?
So at the beginning of your video that you're sending out on social media, you need to set out a very fat disclaimer with regards to what you're going to be presenting in this video, and that it's for educational purposes, and that it's not supposed to be treatment, and that they should seek the expertise of a healthcare practitioner should they wish to implement this, and they should never do it when they've got any injuries. So there's a fat disclaimer that you need to put in, or that I would suggest that you put in before videos like that. And then also, whatever you're doing, Dorrit, must always be evidence-based. So if you are doing, a stretch, or explaining a stretch or demonstrating a stretch, then that stretch needs to be specifically evidence-based for that injury or for that condition. So I would always also, just as a footnote to that, or as a reference to that video, put in evidence-based references, so that you basically taking away from yourself and you're saying, I'm basing it on this evidence. In that way, it's not Dorrit's idea, it's some scientific guide's idea.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
Any other questions?
Something that should be, I think this is something that's really much overlooked by health professionals. I mean, we're talking now about teletherapy, but I can't stress enough how important it is to have disclaimers on your social media, on your website, because a lot of the times through content marketing, we are using education as a way of marketing, right? So when we provide information on like Facebook or Instagram to show that we know what we're talking about, it's so important that you have, whether it's a highlight on your Instagram stories or at the bottom of every blog or in a footer or in the header somewhere, you need to have very clearly a disclaimer that you are not providing therapeutic or treatment advice, that it's for educational purposes. So this should be standard anyway. You should be having disclaimers everywhere. So thanks so much for bringing that up, Tanya. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, because I don't think people realize how important it is to have these disclaimers.
I will just say that it is important.
Okay, awesome. If there's anyone else that would like to ask a question, just unmute yourself and you can start talking. In the meanwhile, I will just
Tanya.
Yes, Ryan.
Yes, hello, my name is Ryan. I have a question for you. Earlier in the presentation, you spoke about how if a patient doesn't have access to a printer or a scan or any way of giving the consent via signature, that they can email through their consent. How would you recommend to go around doing that to make it as legally binding as possible? What exactly should be in that email?
So there should definitely be a history in that email with regards to just why the patient cannot physically sign the informed consent.
Okay.
And you as a practitioner, I would suggest that you go a little bit the extra mile with your patients on this regard, and just, try, and see if you can't assist them to do an electronic signature. I think most people have Adobe. I mean, my parents have Adobe. So and they are, certainly not tech savvy.
Yeah, it's mainly for elderly people that I'm asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's really an issue, then revert to that as a last resort, but have a good history of why you're doing it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I think also important is that, and that's why with telehealth, you always have to almost have like a step-to-step guide for everything that you want people to do. And that's why you have to have certain protocols and things in place for people like that, where it's for older people, give them a step-by-step guide and make sure that the forms that you are using is easy, accessible and fillable, so that it's not such a high-tech thing that you need to go through a website and it's lately there's so many nice apps available, and we will also at the end of the webinar talk a little bit about the fillable Adobe consent forms that you can access, but obviously it's important that the information in that form need to be correct and everything, but it's very easy actually to set up your own form and to make it easy for a patient to go and sign on their smartphone using the Adobe app. Yeah. Do we have more questions?
Tian, just a comment. So one of my patients was struggling with Adobe and signing the PDF. All that was needed was to go to the website and just update the program.
Okay, yes. So and that's also something that you can also then put in your step-by-step guide is give the people the advice, because a lot of people's Adobe is outdated or it's not installed on their smartphones. I mean, my PA made our consent form available so that we can do electronic signatures, and I couldn't do it because I didn't have Adobe on my smartphone. So yeah, so it is, if you're not tech savvy, it's better to just make sure that somebody that do know how to do these things help you with this and also set up a nice guide for you and for your patient on how to access these forms. Anyone else? No one.
That was easy.
Yes. Tanya, one last comment from your side. Any last thought?
Yeah, I think I'm excited for these changes. Like I said in my presentation, I think it's the future of healthcare. And I really do hope that, you know, after lockdown or whenever your councils have explained it to end, that there will be some form of telehealth going forward, and that it continuously develops as it is now.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tanya. And I think it's this was such a helpful webinar also, and a very important webinar for us as healthcare professionals. Yeah, so I think it's important, guys. If you're not sure about your consent form and the process forward on how you should advertise, all those things, I think it's very important that you do get in contact with Tanya and that you speak directly to Tanya so that she can help you and guide you through the process of how to set up your telehealth practice in terms of the regulations and those things, so that you are within the law, okay, and that we don't overstep boundaries. Because this is also important. This, like Tanya said, this is the future for healthcare in South Africa and for the world, for that matter. And if we screw up now, we are going to make it very difficult to get this platform established also in South Africa. So let's be compliant and let's make sure that what we do it to the best ability, and also that we are within those rules and regulations. And then, yeah, I think if you are still uncertain about certain things, about how to set up your platform, all those things, please do join our mentorship program. Just message me. There is a link that was posted also. If you want to join the mentorship program, just complete your details. We will contact you so that we can help you and guide you. We have also included in our packages consultation with Tanya. So yeah, please get in contact with us so that we can assist you in this process to set up your telehealth practice. And then, yeah, Tanya, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and we appreciate it. And I think that a lot of practitioners will learn from this webinar. So yes, thank you for what you've taught us today. Have a good day.
Perfect.
Cheers, guys.